Hey there fans, welcome back to our channel. So today we're going to take a little bit of a different direction with our normal videos. I know that I've been promising you guys to do some action figure reviews, which we already started. But in the next series, many of you guys, based on the age range that I'm seeing on my analytics dashboard, a lot of you guys are on the younger side. So you might not have been exposed to this particular franchise, and so that's why I want to dig a little bit deeper, explain to you what it is before I actually do the action figure reviews. I figure if I can give you a backstory, that might actually help you out in understanding what these who these characters are when I do the action figure review. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We actually mentioned it in my top 10 cartoon video. What the franchise that I like to cover are the Gargoyles, Disney's Gargoyles, back from the early to mid 90s, if I'm not mistaken. But anyhow, I'm going to give you just some of the cool points about this story, and I'm going to actually recommend you guys checking this series out. Remember back in our video, we mentioned that there were 3 seasons. I don't recommend watching the third one. You can totally skip that if you want. If you look at it, the first season has about 13 episodes, and the second season has about 52 episodes, and that's really where the story gets really good, really imaginative. Just a bunch of cool stuff that comes out of the second season. So the first season sets you up, second season really takes off. Third season, like we mentioned, there was a change, there was a writing change, there was a director change, there was some type of leadership change, and it tanked after that. So don't recommend going into the third one. But let's go ahead and let me just give you a little bit of backstory and then go into the detail of the characters, right? So the show is based on a clan of gargoyles that are protecting a castle in medieval Scotland, right? The castle comes under attack by Vikings looking to pillage and plunder, right, for whatever resources are within. It could be food, could be gold, not really sure. Definitely food at the very least, right? So naturally the gargoyles, they're actually in stone during the day, so they turn to stone, and then by night they actually come to life. They turn into flesh, right? So they're there to protect the castle, and they manage to actually stop the invaders, the Vikings, right? So unfortunately though, because they're so I don't want to say demonic looking, but I mean they don't look like something you wanna pet, right? They do. They have this certain look to them that kind of takes you back a little bit. So due to that indifference, right, the humans don't really like them. Specifically the princess, who is the leader, and her sorcerer, the magus. They don't really like the gargoyles, right? So they treat them very, very differently, very cruelly, in my opinion. And so that sets up a compelling story, right? Because you've got the gargoyles who are there, even though they're being mistreated or looked at in a certain negative light and not really seen as equals or treated nicely. They're still there to protect because of the honor and duty that they're bound with, right? So unfortunately, the gargoyles are eventually betrayed, and this betrayal leads to most of their entire clan being wiped out. So while they were in stone in daytime, a lot of them were killed off. They were defenseless, unfortunately, right? Which sets up the tragedy of the remaining characters. So due to a misunderstanding, a spell was cast on the remaining surviving gargoyles, keeping them in stone permanently. So it didn't matter if they were at nighttime or at daytime, obviously, they were in stone. Now the spell was cast to break once the castle rose above the clouds. So it's really interesting the way the spell worked. So fast forward to the 21st century, you have a multi-billionaire mogul named David Xanatos, who what he eventually does is he actually manages to build a really tall skyscraper in New York City, one that actually rises above the clouds. So the top of it actually goes high enough where the clouds are at a certain level, and the city towers, or excuse me, the tower actually goes above the clouds. And so what he does is he joins in this giant venture where he just he pulls in resources to take the castle right? That, you know, now we're talking about 21st century. So that castle that's been abandoned, obviously, and so on and so forth. He's basically chopped it up physically and then had it moved from Scotland to New York City, where he actually manages to reconstruct it at the top of his building. And so what that does is, because remember, the spell is set so that once the castle rises above the clouds, the spell would break. And so David Xanatos basically gambled on that, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So once he brings the gargoyles and he places them back on their normal positions, resting positions, at nighttime falls, and sure enough, the spell is broken and they're all brought back to life, right? So that's essentially where we're at. And what happens is pretty interesting, because then they realize that their castle is no longer confined to just the physical building, but what they do is they adapt New York City as their castle. So they expand their territory as protectors to protect the entire city from abroad, from enemies that are from abroad and from within, right? You have gang violence, street violence, organized crime. Yeah, it goes into a number of different things that actually the Gargoyles do help out with. So pretty really cool story, I would say. A lot of cool characters come out within these next 2 seasons. And let's go ahead and get into some of those characters, right? The main cast consists of, at first, it's Goliath, who's the leader, Brooklyn, Broadway, Lexington, Hudson, Bronx. Those are all your gargoyles, right? And they're all named after different areas within New York City. They're just named after the city itself, right? So they didn't have names except for Goliath. Goliath was the only one that was named by the humans. All the others were not. So yeah, they all pretty much adapted names from New York City itself. Then you have the human character, which is Elisa Maza. She's a detective, and she befriends the gargoyles, and she basically, is their friend through thick and thin, right? She's there from the beginning to the end. Really cool character. I've always enjoyed Elisa Maza. She's awesome, and so yeah. Then we had her partner, Matt Bluestone, who I think in the second season he comes to join, but he's another cool character, works with Elisa as natural instincts kick in, right? As far as detective work, he notices things, he picks up on things and starts to question them, and he eventually discovers the identity of the gargoyles based on his keen detective work, right? And then eventually we get an addition to the gargoyles, and that would be Angela. Now, I'm not going to give you a whole lot of detail on Angela because I don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't seen it, who would like to see it. But Angela is another cool character that I absolutely fell in love with. So my 3 favorite characters are going to be Goliath, Angela, and Elisa Maza from the short. Oh, and Bronx. Gosh, I really like Bronx. Cool character. Look, I got his action figure right here, as a matter of fact. Look how cool this character. Look at that. Look at the sculpting on that. That's how cool this guy is. Look at that. Man, I'd like to have Bronx as a pet guardian. But anyhow, yeah, so that's that. And then let's get into some of the villains, right? Because villains are what makes it interesting and gives the hero something to fight for, fight against, right? Anyhow, the main villain is actually David Xanatos. You'll learn that in the very first, between the first and the second episode. He tries to pretend like he's their friend, but by the second episode, he shows his true colors and he's actually a villain, right? So he's their main villain, and it's pretty interesting because they have to live at this guy's building. Remember, he owns the castle now, and his which sits on top of his building in New York City. So they're vulnerable in the daytime, and so they take a gamble. They're like, look, we can't afford to leave the castle. So that's where they're kind of stuck until eventual, the dangers continue to progress, and so eventually they leave to a clock tower, which is where one of the New York precincts where Elisa Maza works out of. So he's the main villain. Then we have other villains such as Macbeth. Now, what's pretty cool about Macbeth, it's kind of like, it's what you hear. If you hear the name Macbeth, you think about Shakespeare, right? Shakespearean literature. A lot of this has to do with Shakespearean literature, especially when we're talking about Macbeth, right? The book Macbeth. If I recall correctly, actually, when this was airing, I was in high school and I was actually reading Macbeth and Hamlet. So I was able to notice things that the writers put in there from Shakespearean literature. So that was pretty fun for me. That was pretty cool. Another key person is Demona. She is actually Goliath's former love interest. Another outstanding villain. To be honest with you, out of all of them, she's actually my favorite. Out of all the villains that get introduced, she's actually my favorite. Then you have some human characters that are known as the Pack. They were these TV stars, but they were, you know, they went evil. I don't know. I think their show got canceled or something like that, and then they turned into a life of crime. Not really quite sure, but they were muscle for hire, and they became eventual enemies of the Gargoyles. And each time the Gargoyles would actually stop them, which caused them to try and up their game. They needed to find other ways to try and defeat the Gargoyles, because obviously they're outmuscled. The Gargoyles are just naturally stronger than human beings. So yeah. Then you have characters, mythical characters like Oberon. You know, he has to deal. He's like the father of everything that has to do with mysticism within the world, right? Anything that has a like a mythological component or story, right? Like, gosh, I'm trying to think about like what it could be, and I just don't remember. But anyhow, he's like the top father of all of these supernatural beings, supernatural characters. He resides in his own magical island. Really cool, really cool. Again, it's actually him and his wife Tatiana. They're both magical creatures, so you know, cool villain. Then you have villains like Thalog, who is actually a clone of Goliath, and he's actually a reverse. So actually, Goliath's name in reverse is Thalog, and that's where you get the name from. And the reason is because this guy's the opposite of Goliath. Goliath is good, he's a protector, he's honorable, he's all these great heroic qualities. So be it that the name is flipped backwards, Thalog would be the opposite. He's powerful, he's power hungry, he's money hungry, he's evil, he's wicked, right? All the opposite things, all the opposite attributes that Goliath is. But you know, still pretty cool when the two of them mix it up. He's also got an opposite color scheme. So Goliath is like purple with black hair, and Thalog is black skinned with white hair. So quite the opposite. It's not necessarily a black. I would say it's like a grayish blue, but definitely a different color than Goliath. And then finally, just a last mention would be the Archmage. He's like a magician, a wicked sorcerer type. So he shows up a number of different times to battle the Gargoyles, and his actual backstory is actually pretty cool. So yeah, those are pretty much your main villains. There's other ones, and we'll get into some supporting ones. You have Talon, which is actually his name is Derek Maza. So you'll get to see how that comes about. It's pretty cool actually. So then you have a mad scientist named Anton Savarius that works for David Xanatos, and he's the one that pretty much dabbles in the cloning process, right? I think he's the one who helped create Thalog, if I'm not mistaken. Halcyon Renard, right, which is another billionaire who's constantly going head to head with David Xanatos. You have you know, certain we talked about organized crime, and Tony Dracon would be like you know, the mafia, the leader of the mafia within New York City at the time. You have Owen Burnett, who is David Xanatos' butler and right-hand man. Then you have a mythical creature named Puck. Again, very much coming from the Shakespearean literature aspect of things, but you know, fun character nonetheless. He gets himself into some trouble, and the Gargoyles into some troubles with his mischievous ways, right? So those are just some of the supporting villains that you'll see over again. All of them are pretty cool, to be quite honest with you. Some of the cool things about this show was that I remember reading an article when the show first came out, and the writers said that, or the director said that no two gargoyles look alike, right? So every gargoyle that is shown, and there's not that many of them. I think the most amount of gargoyles that you'll probably see is in the first, I don't know, the first episode. But if you look at them, none of them actually look alike. They're all very different and very unique and very distinct. So I thought that was pretty cool, right? Very creative. As you go through the stories, Goliath actually gets taken on an adventure. Actually, Goliath and Elisa, basically it's a world adventure, right? It takes them to different places of the world wherever they're needed. There's this relic I forget what it's called, and this relic actually ends up taking them to where they are needed the most, right? And so upon that travel, they managed to come across current clans of gargoyles. Three specifically that I can remember. There's a trio that lives in the UK. There's a number of them that live in Japan, and there's a number of them that live in Mexico. If I'm not mistaken, it was in one of the ancient sites. I don't know if it's Chichen Itza, Teotihuacan. You know, one of the ancient pyramids over there in Mexico. So pretty cool, and they are all very unique, and they are all very cool looking, as you can see as I'm displaying some of them right now. Another cool thing that I did mention before, I think the show does a phenomenal job of mixing mythology, literature, and then science fiction. You know, we touched on, you know, the cloning aspect, which, to be honest with you, we're now past science fiction. It's actually science nonfiction, right? Because cloning does exist today. It's not perfected, but you know, I remember reading like a decade ago that a cat was cloned, right, successfully, and sheep and stuff like that. So cloning is very real. Now we get into gene splicing, right? That is still science fiction, but I'm sure that you know, someone's working on it, and I'm sure they're really close to making that happen. So yeah, and then there's genetic reconstitution, which is essentially, you know, anti-aging, which is still science fiction, but again, I'm pretty sure with the technology that we have, it's really close. You know, people are doing some. I'm sure there's a lot of research going into making this happen, right? You know, the fountain of youth type of thing, right? So yeah. But like I said, the mythology, the literature, the science fiction, it's all a wonderful blend. It gives you a really good story. So last thing I want to say is there's a potential movie I read a couple of weeks ago. I think it was last month or the month before that. I think there's a green light for this movie to, you know, go live action, which is really cool. There's a couple of concerns that I have. So actually, there's two things that I questions, right? Are we going to see an actual live action, kind of like an Avatar type look, or would we see more of a family oriented thing like Mario, right? I think either one could work. I think I'd rather see the live action one, to be honest with you. But I'm because it's Disney. I'm afraid that, you know, I mean, let's be real. Like we mentioned before, Disney has been declining, as well as Warner Brothers, you know, and so on and so forth. So I'm worried that at this particular time, if this movie to come out, based on the trend, it might not do as well, which is sad because I think it's a really cool story. I hope and pray that they stay neutral in that. And they don't really need to look that much further as far as cast members. They need to get the original voice actor for Goliath. I cannot imagine Goliath being any other voice other than the actor. And let me take a quick look so I can see the actor's name. I had it here just a minute ago. Keith David. Keith David is the guy who voices Goliath. Phenomenal actor, phenomenal, imposing voice, right? And that's what you want for such an imposing character, right? He's strength and brute and honesty, you know, and it's just Keith David just has that tone set with Goliath that he makes him strong and that humble and noble at the same time. And then when he's got to go into action, it's like, roar, you know, it's like, wow, it's real commanding. It's like phenomenal. The guy's range is amazing. So I wouldn't want anybody else to play Goliath or voice Goliath other than Keith David. So hopefully that'll become a reality if this does go. So guys, that's the background that I have on Gargoyles. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of knowledge, because the figures that I'm going to be reviewing, right, you'll be able to relate to it as we go on, or you'll have a little bit more knowledge. And like I said, recommend, if you haven't checked it out, check it out. I guarantee you won't be disappointed in the first 2 seasons. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. Take care till all are one. Peace out.